Hey there, this is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. And in this video, I want to share some music production tips and techniques while recreating the beat in the Neighborhood's Daddy Issues. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and listen to the finished product. So let's start by focusing in on the drums. So here we have a drum rack in Ableton Live loaded with some sounds that we're going to be using. And here is the pattern. Now, this is the pattern that we hear going on during the choruses. But what I want to focus in on is drum layering. And that's the idea of layering multiple sounds together to create one sound. And this will go a lot farther than trying to shape the sound that you're looking for from one drum sample. So for instance, this kick drum here is actually a layer of two individual kick drums. So let me solo this kick drum. So we have the bottom kick drum, which is this file here. I'm going to mute the top one. And this is more to cover just the low end beef or the low end punch. And then the top kick drum is more of the high end thump. And so when you combine them together, and I can mix each layer here. Now, the process of doing this is really simple in Ableton Live in the drum rack. So let's say we have a couple kicks that we want to layer together to do the same thing I just did. I'll grab a kick drum from here and drag that to whichever cell I want in the drum rack. Once I have it loaded, just click that sample and hit Command G, and then that's going to turn that sample into an instrument rack. Now I can go ahead and highlight a bunch of samples and drag it in that rack, and this one note will trigger all of these individual samples together. So let me just unsolo this, and here you go. So then you would blend and mix, and if you open this up, those are all the different kick drum layers that we have all together. So I'm just simply going to delete that. And so that's what I've done here. I was able to layer these two individual kick drums to get the sound that I'm looking for. I wanted a nice thumpy part of the kick, but yet I also wanted to combine it with some nice low end. And then just adjust the volume here to taste. I've also done the same thing for the snare drum. So as you can see, the snare is made up of two individual sounds. And then we're going to have an EQ right on the snare drum itself to take away some of the low end so we can have the kick just really breathing and living in that zone. And then I've got a reverb inserted directly onto that snare just to give some room and more tail end for the snare drum. And I personally like having the layers done this way because it makes it easier when I'm programming my drums here in my MIDI editor. I'm really just seeing or visually just having one kick, but it's really triggering two kick samples. So that one kick is triggering those two kick samples. It just makes it easier when I'm programming my drums. So here we have the kick snare, and then we have the snap that what I decided to do was just nudge the whole row of snaps a little bit to the left from the snare drum. And this is how I've done that. I just copied the whole row of the snare, held my Option key, drag up, and then make sure I'm selecting all of the snaps. They're highlighted. And holding the Command key, just nudge them slightly to the left. And this is going to move the whole row slightly to the left and giving me a nice flam attack, a flam texture with the snare and the snap. Now let's do a little bit of EQing to the drums. So I'm going to go to EQ8 and insert that directly onto the drum rack. So that's going to affect all the kicks, the snare, and everything that we have in the drum rack here. Double click this and swoop a little bit off this. And what I'm going to do is take it off the high pass and give a brighten that up a little bit. And now let's add just a little bit of compression. And for this, I'll use the glue compressor. I like the character of this compressor. So we'll have a slow attack. Let's try about 10 and a quick release there. So we get a nice little pump. We're trying to just keep the punchiness or the attack of the drums all together. We don't want to lose that. And I'm doing an exaggeration on the threshold so I can hear what the compression's doing. I'll do a little bit of makeup and I'll scale it back. And then let's go ahead and add some saturation to this. So we'll put the drive up and then lower the output. Now moving on to the bass, we hear a nice buzzy but deep bass going on throughout the verses and the chorus. So for this, I'm going to use Ableton Live's wavetable, but this can be done and achieved with any two or more oscillator synth that you might have in your DAW. Because we're going to go straight to a sawtooth and we're just going to pitch this down a couple octaves. So let's listen to the progression. Now you hear that overlapping between one note to the other. So let's make sure we go from polyphonic to monophonic so that we don't have that going on. And then use the onboard filter frequency to just cut off some of that high end there. And let me bump up a little of the resonance. And now we can add some filter drive to this. Just a little bit of filter drive. And what goes a long way is adding a some kind of harmonic distortion. In this case, I'm going to use Ableton Live's amp simulator right onto the wavetable. And then we'll use an EQ8 to just carve out some of that remaining high end that we don't want. And now you can just by taste open up the filter frequency here to let a little bit more of that buzz go through. And then grab a compressor to do some side chaining because the kick drum is going to now create that pulsating action that we hear in the bass line. So I'm going to click sidechain on this compressor and we're going to get audio from the drums and which drum element. It's going to be the kick drum. So put the kick drum. And now hear that with the drums. And now I also want to layer this bass with another bass that has a little bit more texture and actually has a bit strumming to it. And we're going to use the Moto bass by IK Multimedia. And we're going to be using the 70s P bass patch. So let me just copy the same exact pattern that we've created on the wavetable. Just hold Option, click, and drag that over. And let's just solo this bass part. Well, it's too low, so we need to go a whole octave up. So let me just Apple A or Command A, and then just hold Shift and up to take it a whole octave higher. And it's cool, but I don't want it to play those whole notes. So we actually want to create a pulsating rhythm. So an easy way to do this is just go to the MIDI effects folder in Ableton Live, click and drag the arpeggiator, and now. So now it's actually just arpeggiating those notes. And we can change the rate here so that we get a 16th note or an 8th note. Let's just leave it on 8th note in there and open up the gate. That's the distance between each notes that are being separated, that's being arpeggiated. All right, and now let's go ahead and take an overdrive. We're going to do some saturating here, but adding some distortion, the overdrive. And bringing down the dry and wet. And then use an EQ8 to just take out some of the low end so that the first bass line will handle all of the bottom end and sub. And this is more just for texture. A little less drive. See what they sound like together. Really cool. Now let's just take the same compressor that we have from our first bass, hold Option, and drag that over to this bass line. nice texture added to that bass. Now let's focus our attention on the main element that's really generating a lot of the vibe and atmosphere that we can hear and feel throughout this song, and those are the guitars. Now, if you're a guitar player or you have a guitar player available, then you could probably just take advantage of watching how I'm going to treat the sound. But if you don't, then you could easily pull up any guitar patch that you might have. I'm going to use Native Instruments Contact, the factory library. So I want to start with the stock. What can you do with just the stock library sound? So here, let's go over to the band folder in the Contact Factory library, and let's choose guitar. And we're going to choose solo guitar here. So I'll click and drag that over here. So just playing that on my MIDI controller. Now, on the outset, it is a bit cheesy, but what we're going to do is some processing to get it where we want it. So let's first take off the cabinet and the reverb and lower the drive, and that'll give us just a straight, clean guitar sound. Okay. And then what I want to do is also layer this sound with another guitar sound, but one that's purposely more vintage and has got an old, vinyl type of texture to it already. And that is over here in the vintage section and the Mellotron. So let's go over here to Mellotron and go to Mellotron guitar. So I'm going to also just drag that in here. So we've got the top guitar, which is that clean guitar part. Then we've got the Mellotron guitar here in the bottom. So I need to make sure that the MIDI channel here is set to Omni so that it receives the same MIDI information. So now let's go ahead and just blend these two together. So let me just play you the chords. Here are the chords. Now, the Mellotron is really dominating here, so let's just lower this down. And I'll raise the release of that, the Mellotron. Okay, now let's get into some processing. So let's start with adding a echo. Let's start with adding delay first. So I'm going to go to my echo here. I'm going to set it to ping pong, and I'm going to use the onboard filter here to just focus delaying. I don't want to waste any energy delaying any of the bottom low end here. So we'll just filter that out, and we'll make sure we set it to ping pong. And let's just go ahead and keep that around 41% or something like that. And then let's go ahead and use a chorus. So we're going to use a standard chorus plugin here. And this is really where you get a lot of that tone, and just drench this all in the chorus here. And what's going to create the atmosphere and space would be reverb. So we're going to directly insert a reverb on top of that. And let's just experiment by dialing back the dry and wet first. Let's change the global quality from economic to high and put the stereo all the way to 100 so it's nice and a nice wide signal there. Okay, now what we'll do is just EQ to shape the tone that we're getting here. So don't need a lot of this low end here. And let's give a little bit more boost to the bottom low mid here. And some of that twanginess or. Now I'm going to head over to the chorus plugin again and then lower the high pass and bring that down to about 300 or so because I want the chorus to affect more of the body of the signal that's coming in. And then let's go ahead and add a compressor after the EQ to add a little bit of sidechain. This is just creating a little bit more motion. So we'll do the same thing, go to the drums and take it from the kick drum. This is not going to be as dramatic as the bass, but we'll get a little bit of action there. And then what we can do is use the utility plugin in Ableton Live to create a little bit more width by adding some more information to the side. So I'm going to just click where it says width and crank that a little bit to the right. See what that sounds like with everything else. See, the trick here is with lots of chorus and lots of verb, just creating that atmosphere. So now I'm going to duplicate that same guitar patch that we've just created into another track, but I'm going to have less of the mellotron layer, just, really just barely there, and more of this. I left the solo dry guitar right where it is. And we're gonna have a little bit same processing. But a little bit less chorus because I want this performance to stick out a little bit more in the middle. And I've put a little bit more reverb. So about 70. So I'm just kind of tweaking with some of the settings here. And as you can see, a lot more high end has been cut off. So here is this part that's being played on top of the chords. So then when they're both together, and now let's bring it home by adding a shaker loop here. So a couple things I want to do to the shaker to add a little bit more texture. And as you notice, really bright and sticking out in the mix. So I'm going to go to my audio effects folder and go to the overdrive. And then we're going to lower the dynamics a little bit and just mess around with the dry and wet. And that overdrive adds a lot of body to the shaker. So bring the tone down, maybe a little bit of the drive down as well. And then use an EQ to shave off that bottom end that we've just added, which we don't really need for a shaker. And we can also warm this up too by getting rid of some of that high end. Remember, the warmer the sound, the farther away it's going to be in the mix. The brighter it is, it's a real good indicator of how close something is in the mix. So the brighter it is, the more up in your face it becomes. So let's go ahead and unsolo this and bring it with the rest of the track. Now I'm also going to go ahead and take the compressor that we have on the bass, which is sidechaining, just copying that over, but not too much, just a little bit of that. And then let's add an auto pan. So I'm going to put an auto pan. I'll put that before, actually I'll put it after the compressor. And we're just going to do a little bit of panning, a little bit from left to right to cause some width as well. And we can do the same thing we did with the guitars. Use the utility and send some of that panning information more to the side. Now I want to also show you what's going on the master bus, because I'm using some stock plugins here to process and just kind of help glue everything all together. So we start off with adding a saturator. I always love using saturators on my overall mix just to add some extra harmonics, and it really does help. Saturation really just helps the mix just glue together. So this is a preset in Ableton Live from the saturator called a bit warmer. And I like using this one. This is without it. Just lifts, helps everything lift overall. Then we'll go ahead and use an EQ to maybe just shape the overall tone of the mix. And moving over to the glue compressor with a slow attack all the way on 30 and a really quick release. And I'm looking for about 3 to 4 gain reduction here. And then I'm using a multi-band dynamics here to just kind of balance out all these 3 frequency bands and just kind of help set overall the tonal balance of the mix. And then a limiter here, just to make sure we're not clipping at the end. thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was encouraging and inspiring you to use any of the tips and techniques that I've used in this video in your upcoming projects. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I wanted to give you the heads up that I'm producing a course called Producing Indie Pop, walking you through the step-by-step process in detail of producing a song in the lane of MGMT, Tame Impala, The Neighborhood, and many, many, many more. So if you want first dibs as to when this course will be available and all the detail and extra bonuses from this course, just definitely click the link below in the description box. So you can visit beatacademy.com/indiepop to get on the waiting list for this course. Thank you so much. Be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you next time.